really good discussion. And I think you're absolutely right. This is something they often talk about, compliance of all kinds, is that at first people resist it, but they'll find out eventually that it actually does benefit your company quite a lot to meet one of these onerous standards when you actually have to justify all of your decisions and make sure you're doing all the things you should be doing. Anyway, so I just wanted to show you where this, in case you haven't used it, Zoom, if you record Zoom, it just makes an MP4 file right here. And you can just drag and drop that into YouTube. So the videos for this class will all just appear right here. So there's the first video. And it probably is done processing by now. Yeah, so you can watch the first video. And I'll just have a series of these right there, which is what I always do. This is very nice for people who come by later and everything. Anyway, so
that's very cool.
Yeah.
My cousin took a bunch of notes and I keep dynamically and I asked for them.
Yeah.
This is very nice.
Yeah, yeah. And the good thing about YouTube is you can translate, I think, all your languages. You can speed up and slow down and search. There's a lot of advanced features in YouTube that the students really like. Yeah, sure. Anyway, so I'll have that there. All right, so let's go on to the next bit of this. There's a bunch of these things. And all right, so security governance. This is the practices that organize your, this is the management, the organization of your security efforts. So what you're trying to do, this is something, a lot of beginning security people focus on something technical, and then they worry about something technical, like the length of passwords or something. But what really matters is your business. What do you need to do? You have to be able to explain how it affects the business. So the goal here is to maintain your business processes so you can do whatever your business goal is. And you can also grow and handle the problems that come up with resiliency. So of course, you might also be complying with regulations that come from the outside, like government or industry regulations. So you have principles. Security is not just an IT issue. It is a business issue. So you have to align your security function to the business, strategy, goals, missions, and objectives. You have to make a business case explaining why they should do whatever security things you might want to do. Like you might want to buy a better firewall, but you have to make a business case explaining how the company will benefit from that if you want to succeed. So the CSO is the security officer at the top level in charge of this. The InfoSec team should be led by them, and they report directly to senior management. So they're outside the typical hierarchical structure because, unfortunately, unless you are actually a security company, security, and in general IT, is not actually in the main line of business. You make a product, you sell it, so your sales team is right in the main line, and IT and security are seen as sort of expenses, irritating them because they don't directly contribute to something that makes money. And therefore, you have to rigorously justify everything you do because the companies always say, why should I spend money on security when it does not create more product and more money coming in? It is an issue. So you have various kinds of plans. You got a strategic plan that might go over 5 years, and then you have tactical plans to meet shorter term deadlines, and then operational plans to take care of little things in the meantime. And this is what your management team is thinking about. So your strategic plan, things like a risk assessment, tactical plans for things like acquisitions and hiring, and operational plans for all these things, staffing assignments and scheduling and so on. You have to have change control. Amateur companies just install new stuff and use it, but once you get done being an amateur, you have to actually plan things. You have to propose things, get approval by a change control board, and when you change things, you have to roll them out correctly. You have to install a new thing with a back out option so you can go back to the old thing if the new thing doesn't work. You have to educate your staff and your help desk and your customer relations and everything about what they should be telling people about the new thing, and so on. I've seen 2 of these at my college. About 10 years ago, they had a rollout of new computers. They got Windows XP machines for everybody, and they rolled them out, and it was actually very well done. I was very pleased with it. It took about a year, and they started with just one department, and they took one branch office that wasn't too important and put it there, and then they told all the IT staff and everybody gradually, and it worked very well. It took a year, and they rolled out new computers for everybody, and it was fine. Then last semester, just before the semester started, the vendor convinced our chancellor that our banner system was expiring. We have an Oracle database that runs everything, and that they had to go to the next version right away. And he told them they could roll out the next version in 1 month before the semester started and everything would be fine. And never believe anybody that tells you that, because even in the unlikely event that the actual commercial product is fine, you have a ton of other things that people have built that connect into it that are not really the same. Even if you change something like your server software to the next version, you have no idea until you check how many things have been custom written that rely on the old version. So it really takes like a year to roll it out, and the result was a disaster. The students couldn't sign up for classes, they couldn't reserve rooms. It was just appalling. Yeah, there's a real process of rolling things out, and there's certifications in project management, and they're good things to get. Just in this issue, how do you plan a big change and implement it the right way? And one big thing is you always have to have a rollback plan. You don't throw away the old stuff. You keep the old stuff until the new stuff is really working. And if it's going to take you 2 days to install the new stuff, you make sure you have an extra day at the end to roll back to the old stuff before business resumes. So at least something is working when business starts up again. Anyway, this is required if you want to get IT Sec classifications, which are the US Department of Defense. This is the Orange Book. There's these levels of security, and you can't get the higher classifications unless you have change control management. Just like we were saying about the NSA-approved colleges have to prove that they're obeying some of these practices, or you are not mature enough to be at that certification. So you have a change control process, you implement the change in an orderly manner, and you monitor what the consequences are of the change. You test it, you have a rollback plan, users are informed, you test to see what the consequences have been, and then you have a change approval board. So that's changes. Then there's data classification. You have to define different categories of data. You can define it by usefulness or by what authorization is permitted. So you have to first identify a custodian who's going to be the person that actually labels the objects, define the criteria and your labels, exceptions, and then what controls you're going to have. In the simplest case, I used to work at a simple small escrow agency, and they had stuff that had to be shredded when you throw it away and stuff that didn't have to be shredded. So at least you'll have those two categories. Yeah.
Custodian is the person who creates the evaluation criteria?
No, the custodian does not create the criteria. The custodian does the work. Someone above them creates the criteria, and the custodian says, now label these things sensitive but unclassified, these things classified, these things confidential.
So this is the person who puts off what the management or whoever.
That's right. Yeah, the custodian is the technician that implements the policies that are defined from above. Yeah, yeah. All right. And so in the military, you've got top secret, secret, confidential, and unclassified. In business, you typically have confidential, sensitive, and public, but you can have any system you want, but those are the common ones. So your senior manager is responsible for the security of the entire organization. They're supposed to oversee all the work done underneath them. They're not supposed to be getting their hands dirty doing individual things. They're supposed to be making sure that everything is okay and approved by them. Then you have security professionals that write the policies, and data owners are responsible for making sure the information gets classified correctly. And the data custodian does the actual work that the data owner guides. But the data custodian is only responsible for obeying orders. The data owner is responsible for making sure this actually resulted in the goal. And ultimately, right up to the senior manager is ultimately responsible. This is why when there was a big breach of major company, one of the credit companies, Accu something, one of the 3 big credit companies, Equifax. They turned out Equifax got hacked and they lost all their confidential data, and it was because they did not put a patch on a web server that was running a web management framework. And so the official statement that came out a couple weeks later was the top executive at Equifax said it was the problem of the web server maintainer. He didn't put on the patch. And I said, you can't do that. Now here's the rule. You can outsource work, but you cannot outsource responsibility. If your technician running the web server did not put on a patch, then senior management is responsible, because why did you hire an idiot? Why did you not train them? Why didn't you check to see if they did the work? Even if your staff does something wrong, the management is still responsible for what happens. And you can't pretend that your staff being incompetent is not a fault of management. It's also a fault of management. Your job is to make sure you know what your staff is doing and that they're not doing stupid things. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Ultimately, there must be a guard, even if who guards the guards.
Yeah, but the management is responsible for what the end real results are. All right. And then you've got users, which is anybody with access, and you have auditors we talked about who are on the side just making sure that reports, compliance audits, and other audits are created as required, reporting the status of things to regulatory agencies and other agencies. When I worked as an escrow agency, I worked under contract at the Federal Trade Commission, and we had handled a lot of money. That was our main thing. We would get money from lawsuits and distribute it to claimants. And we had an internal audit process that I was really quite charmed by. We really went through everything, said every bit of data that came in, how many records came, where did they go, every bit of money came in here, here's where the money went out, everything was accounted for, and we would then not close a case until we'd done a final audit. And the FTC auditor loved us. He said, you come in every year to audit your cases, and he said, I love auditing your cases because it's all right there. Everything's right. All I have to do is review and make sure you did it right. Other companies I show up and they don't even have it in a box. They don't even know how many boxes there are. They don't even know where they are. And, you know, but if you're handling money, you really have to account for where did all that money go, or there's going to be trouble. Anyway, all right. So we got some cahoots about that. Let's see if I got cahoots. I think I should have the sound, so I will be happier anyway. 2A3, here we are. And good, there's the sound. Cahoots are more fun with the sound. Good. I have more room on my screen too. Things are better now. DEFCON, there you go. I'll give it a few more seconds to see if we have more customers. Apparently not. All right. So which one of these goes for a year? That's the tactical plan. All right. Who is responsible for the security of an organization? I say the manager is responsible for the overall security. All the rest can say, well, that wasn't my department. That's not my responsibility. That bad thing happened. But the manager is responsible for it all. Who makes a backup? That's the custodian. The custodian does all the work. The owner is responsible for making sure it's get done and deciding how many times a year it has to be done and all that, but the custodian does the actual work. This was the hardest thing in the CISSP for me, believe it or not. I remember on the fourth day pounding the table as I still couldn't tell a data custodian from a data owner. For some reason, this was real hard for me to understand. Because I never worked at a corporation, these roles were just meaningless to me, which I think is how most managers feel about like IP addresses and technical terms, like memorizing this stuff and they really don't mean anything to you, so you can't keep them straight. Anyway, all right, who makes compliance reports? Hey, that's what the auditor does. Those are audit reports. All right, let me record the winners, which are somewhere around here. Here they are. All right. So B. Yeah.
That was very good.
All right, good. And 6 here, and I have Robert. Okay. All right. So let's go back and do some more of these. All right. So there are security control frameworks. There are a bunch of them, and my students who've gone off and got jobs have told me that this matters much more, and they really wish we'd spent more time actually learning these things. I tended to gloss over them. These are big frameworks for how you do it, and they all do approximately the same thing, and they all kind of blur together and make me sick. But the fact is, people really use these things. 27,000 is probably the most famous. It typically takes 3 to 5 years and $1 million to achieve 27,000 compliance, and it requires proving that your entire organization is up to a high level of maturity. And basically what it means is a blizzard of paper has to move back and forth for everything you do. This is ultimately, in my opinion, why people say it costs $700 to buy a hammer if you're in the Army, because you don't just buy a hammer. That company has to prove that they have met all these requirements for security throughout the whole level. So we'll talk about some of these. This is the big one, the international standard. 27,000 is a whole list of sections. There are pages of these, yeah.
The first list, did you rate that in?
Oh, no, just the order they are in a book. No, there's no simple, I know it would be nice to think, just learn this one and forget the rest, and that is emphatically not true. The only thing is, typically your company will make a strategic decision to comply with one of these, and that will determine who they're allowed to do business with. People will require one of these to do your contract. And so, but of course, they're all very similar. They all mean you have a whole bunch of layers of security management proving that you have considered everything in security.
So a lot of them, there are like accounting, they'll do corporate.
Yes.
27,000. So how it fits into your model of business that you, most of your business that you would.
Well, it means you have to have a whole bunch of layers of management and a whole bunch of documents produced to prove that you did this test and that test, and that you're obeying proper practices all the way through.
So is there an auditor that you apply with this framework? Is there a separate entity, or is this the question you say, okay, I applied if I work for it?
Oh, this is a very good question. You have both internal audits and external audits. Like I was saying at my company, you'll have internal audits to achieve compliance, and most of these require you to be examined from the outside by external auditors. Like if you are PCI DSS compliant and you handle credit card numbers, you have to be, you have to file a document every year. If you only take a small number of credit card numbers, like credit card transactions, like I think 50,000 a year, you can just testify that you meet security controls and they don't verify it. But if you have ever been breached, or if you take more tthan like 500,000, then you have to pay for a QSO to come visit you and do an external audit every year. So I think it's true of all these. You will be audited. Like say my company, we had internal audits and we had an annual external audit from the Federal Trade Commission to make sure that we were meeting their standards. Because of course they are responsible. This is another issue. Kaiser did this a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago. I read the article. Kaiser got an email from somebody in Pakistan saying, I want you to pay me $50 or I'm going to dump your medical records on the internet. And the Kaiser manager said, who is this person? And she said, here's some records to prove I have it. I said, why does this person have our medical records? Who are they? They're not on our payroll. They had hired a company to do data entry. And that company, without telling them, had outsourced it to Pakistan and promised people a few dollars a day and then not paid them a few dollars a day. So they were, they said, wait a minute, what happened here? And the point is, Kaiser is responsible for that. If you outsource to an idiot and they outsource to someone horrible, you're responsible. You have to not only make an agreement with them, you have to audit them to see if they're doing something terrible, because they very well could be doing something completely wrong. And it's your job to know that. You do not escape responsibility by outsourcing to someone else to do a bad thing. Anyway, this is the lengthy system. It's like 5 pages long. This is just the start and end of the list. Requirements of everything, all these long documents listing every little thing. A published code of practice for electronic discovery, which is how you submit evidence when you get sued, and so on. Health organization guidelines, incident response for when you get hacked, many, many things you have to do to achieve this compliance. So then there's the Zachman Framework. This is a 2-dimensional classification system. So you've got these questions like what, where, when, and why. And then you've got different levels: executive, business management, engineer, technician, and so on. It was originally intended not for security, but just for general IT management. But it has been applied to security also. You have this grid of 30 or 40 cells, and each one of those is a person accomplishing a certain job role. TOGAF is another one, an enterprise information architecture with 4 domains: technology, applications, data, and business. Here's the DoD architecture framework for the Department of Defense. You've got these viewpoints: capability, data operation, project, services, standards, and systems. I was just amazed by this stuff because to me, manager is just one person in my way. But management is a whole city full of people at all different levels doing all these different jobs. So here's the British version. British Ministry of Defense architecture, very much similar: strategic, operational, service-oriented, acquisition, tactical, these different viewpoints of what's happening at your business. I remember when I first learned about Microsoft Active Directory domain controllers, I had the same sort of bafflement at how complicated they were. And they said, well, suppose you are Yahoo with 1 million computers and you acquire eBay, and now you have 5,000 locations of eBay that you're going to connect to the 10,000 locations of Yahoo, and you're going to decide, does an administrator over here get trusted over here, and if so, how far? And their domain controllers can actually handle that baffling complexity of how much do you share data and how much do you trust these people. It's the big time. You know, it's far more complicated than the little businesses I was used to, where you just have a boss deciding things. So here's the Sherwood applied business security architecture. You've got what, why, how, who, where, and when, and you got logical, physical, and components, and here's all these things happening in here. Like you have a data inventory. I noticed that one. Here's a question that will really make you aware of security posture. Suppose you have important data, like your customers' credit card numbers. Now I ask you, where is that data, and how many copies are there of that data? Most companies cannot answer this at all. We have a server, but then there are backup tapes, but then some of the people put it in their Dropbox, and some people took it home, and some people emailed it to someone, and some people have quit the company and took their laptop with them, and we really don't know what was on that laptop. Actually, now that you mention it, I have no idea where that data is. And I said, well, you're not able to secure anything until you can answer a simple question like that, a data inventory. And that's why these frameworks are so important. You can be running a business and making money, but when you actually compare yourself to one of these frameworks, it challenges you to get serious about really making sure that you're controlling what's going on here and not just trusting to luck. Yeah.
So if somebody has a business, a small mom and pop just runs the credit card on that, that bill pay.
Square, yeah.
That belongs to, say, First Data.
Yeah.
They're very big here. So the data is now stored on their server.
Hopefully. Well, that's a very good question and a very hard one. You ask it when you swipe the credit card at a small business, where's that data stored? In fact, if you have something like Square that goes in your phone, it sends it up to Square's server, and then I think they now do it right, although in the early versions they did not, where that data is encrypted locally and sent to their server, and no copy in the clear is anywhere. But unfortunately, at restaurants and most merchants, there's a problem. Suppose a customer buys something, you swipe it, and there's a network problem. So you cannot finish the transaction right now. Most of them store it and try again later. Now you have stored it, which is a violation of PCI compliance, but people do it. And Target got breached this way. Target got breached with RAM scrapers. The data, credit card numbers were stored in the RAM of the local device, and they were stolen by malware from the RAM of the local device. This is a very good question, and the answer is not simple at all. You would like to think that you swipe it, it is not stored anywhere on my device. It's sent immediately to some server like a bank or something, and they have it there. That would be the best. But in fact, it's not that simple. And it's very difficult. And there's one big issue is data remnants in RAM. That's what got Target. After you're done with the swipe, there's still a copy of the data in RAM. I did this at Hope like 6 years ago. I demonstrated how to steal passwords out of RAM on machines after you log in. That is now fixed in modern versions of browsers. Microsoft addressed this problem in, I think, 2004. There is a data type in Visual Studio for transient data, where you'll store something sensitive like a password, and when I'm done, it will be erased from RAM, but developers just weren't using it. And so you have leftover stuff in RAM that is sensitive, and some other process on a machine can steal it. That's why, it is actually a big problem. And there is no simple answer. It is real important to investigate that. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm taking your time, but
that's fine.
Hotel,
Yeah.
And I bring this up because when they swipe it through the computer.
Yeah.
Because I've noticed that.
Yeah.
So we don't know if it's stored on their computer.
That's right.
Or if it's gone to
That's
the
right.
PCI compliant place that it's supposed to go.
That's right. You do
Is that
not
right?
know. Yes,
Okay.
you have no way to tell whether they're really storing it when you swipe it. Now, PCI compliance would require that they are not, but here's the dirty secret of PCI compliance. I know one of my students was in charge of setting up PCI compliance. PCI compliance might require 10 things, but you don't have to actually do them. You either have to do them or you have to make an argument why you don't need to do them. And if you can also make the argument that it's too expensive. So if you consider WEP encryption of credit card numbers on wireless networks that was responsible for the largest data breach in history, and then 2 years later, another data breach, again, the largest data breach in history, just stealing the credit card numbers right off the wire. WEP was known to be insecure in 2001. PCI didn't ban it until 2010, and people could get 1 or 2 year extensions saying it's too expensive to upgrade our equipment. So people were still fully PCI compliant, sending data with WEP through 2012. And every breach you've heard of, Target and everything, those companies were all PCI compliant. They wouldn't have been able to have any credit card numbers to steal if they weren't PCI compliant. So this is why a lot of people hate these frameworks. And they say you can obey this framework and still get hacked. Of course, that's the dirty secret. That's why we're all getting so many jobs, is because we're all terrible at our job. There's a good XKCD about this. Can we bring that? But the point is, everybody gets hacked. There's nothing you can buy that will save you. So you just hire more professionals and train them, and you sort of hope that's doing you some good. But yeah.
The friendship communications, if you have errors, they will give you a web router to monitor to make sure that you get that. And it's web, and they didn't change it till they changed it in 2000.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember when I've been in taxis where they call on a ham radio and read your credit card number over the wire. And it's just amazing what goes on out there. Almost all security problems. This is how I got interested in security management. I mean, first I was in a technical field, the latest attack, the latest defense. And then I realized, 90% of breaches happen because of just dumb stupidity. Like people send something in plain text. This is the same thing with health, right? You can try to develop the latest cure for an exotic cancer, but most people die because they do stupid things like get no exercise and smoke. So if you actually wanted to save people, management is where it's at. How do you get people to stop doing things that we know they shouldn't be doing and do simple things they should do? And so this is the issue here. Just making sure that people are actually doing basic best practices is probably the most effective way to secure your organization, not having the latest, most exotic countermeasure. Anyway, so here's another COVID is one you hear about a lot from ISACA, big organization of security professionals. There's ISACA and ISSA and ISC squared. And so my students are in each of these. They have local branches and training. Anyway, so here's the principles of COBIT. You're going to meet the stakeholder needs, cover the enterprise end to end, have a holistic approach, and separate governance from management. And so here's the 7 enablers: principles, policy and framework, processes, organizational structures, culture, ethics and behavior, information, services, and people. It's sort of mind-boggling to me because I don't think in this level, but actually there's all these layers of managers, and they're not all just asleep at the switch. They're doing these things, trying to control how your company runs. Then there's NIST, the official government series, National Institute of Standards. This is the non-military side of government regulations. So you have security principles, the 800 series here. I'm familiar with this because this is where you get the encryption rules, but there's a lot more to it. Yeah.
So this is the one that Cisco CyberOp.
Yeah.
Is that?
It is part of this. Not in any great detail. Nothing in great detail, but yes, this is one part of CISSP. This is one of the main frameworks on any government agency, I think, outside the military has to obey these things. So, and this is where you find a lot of standards for, here's the cryptographic standards, the SP 800, those are the ones I know. I was very interested in those because I teach cryptography and focus on that, but there are many other things here. This is the one where I think, yeah, this is the one. So now that they've defined what should be happening, they have auditing to measure it, and we're fantastically out of compliance. So the military defense is like more than 90%, the Army is more than 90% out of compliance, and it always has been, because they were able to define what you should do. They were able to figure out how to measure it, but they couldn't fund actually achieving it. And this reminds me of something that leaked about a year ago that was considered a big scandal. The TSA is tested for quality. Every year they send people, the only thing they test is they try to sneak guns onto airplanes. And it came out last year that 95% of the time they successfully sneak the gun onto the airplane. And people freaked out and said, what is the point? You guys are idiots. And I said, no, that's much better. Last year it was 98%. So we've improved. And all government security is about at that level. It is, and this is the thing, if you think about public health, it's pretty easy to decide what you should do, and it's pretty easy to measure if you're doing it, but how do you get people to actually do it? That's a whole lot harder. Anyway, yeah, so here's one of the many. There are all these compliance frameworks, and this is what I think of, the SKCD standard, 14 competing standards. So you try to make another one to clean up the mess, and now you have 15 competing standards, because not everybody switches to the new one, and you've just made it worse. And that, in my opinion, is what happened here. There are so many standards because there was something wrong with the existing one, so somebody made another, but now there's something wrong with that. The problem is Moore's Law. Everything in IT keeps changing so fast that everything you have is obsolete pretty soon. And anyway, so HITRUST CSF is a company that works with healthcare and establishes a framework primarily for the healthcare industry. And here's 14 control strategies, control categories like human resources and compliance and asset management and privacy practices. And then you got the Center for Internet Security defines these controls. This, I think, is actually pretty useful. Another thing is the OWASP top 10. There are people that try to list all the things you should do and then list them by priority. Like you were saying before, it would sure be nice if you just tell me which is the most important one. And these guys found that the top 5 things you can do to eliminate most vulnerabilities are this. Like I said, inventory your hardware and software assets. You have to know what you have in hardware and software. Do vulnerability management, so you notice whether patches are being applied or people are installing unauthorized devices or putting on default passwords. Limit use of administrative privileges, that's least privilege, and secure your configurations for your devices. The end stage, where people are going to get infected. Make sure they all have antivirus up to date and all the other things. Those are the 5 basic hygiene steps that would greatly improve your security. And they have a bunch of other ones. Here we are, audit logs and email web browser protections and anti-malware and so on. There's a bunch of other ones, but the top 5 would stop most problems. I say it would have saved that, that company, Equifax. Equifax would have been saved by number 3. If they had just made sure the patches are going on, that would have saved them. All right, here's more boundary defense and so on, an awareness training program, and on it goes. Then there's COSO, the Treadway Commission framework, with these levels all doing the same thing: control, risk, information and communication, monitoring. COBIT is the IT framework from COSO, which is corporate government. And then you have Octave, which comes from Carnegie Mellon. Another system, Octave Allegro, is here, so you establish risk management criteria, then an asset profile, and put things in containers, and then you identify threats, and then you identify risks and mitigate them. This is their idea. All these things accomplish approximately the same thing in different structures. Then you got ITIL, a process management standard with a whole bunch of publications from the Office of Management and Budget. It has a security component, mainly concerned with service level agreement. I know Microsoft is now organized this way, and a lot of companies are, where even branches of the company make service level agreements with each other. Your part of the company will make it. This is when you agree what service to provide, like typically what a certain percentage of uptime, a certain responsiveness when there's a problem, and so on. So here's their core publications. You got tons of them: strategy management, coordination, and change management we talked about, and incident management. Incident response is a big deal. I teach several classes in it. This is how you deal when there is a violation of security. How do you deal with it? And that's a big growing field now because of the cyber war going on. There's a blazing cyber war going on all around us, where nation states are attacking each other, and most of the irritations we hit in security are the shrapnel hitting us from the edges of this war. And because of the Chinese hacking all the American companies in 2010, we now have robust incident response plans because we all know that nation states are hacking in and getting in, and it is not enough to have something like a firewall that you imagine is keeping them out. You have to have a detection system to detect when they get in and a response system to respond when they do get in, because they are getting in, and there's nothing you can buy that will really keep them all out. So you have to have layered defense, and part of it is incident response, how you deal with something once you've found a breach has occurred. And here's Six Sigma. It's another one where you you define something, then you measure to see how well it's done, then you analyze to figure out why it's not working, you improve it, and then you add more controls, and you go around a circle. This is true of all these frameworks. I know it's true of 27,000. They are optimizing, which means you have policies from the top, like an overarching goal. We will protect our customers' data, and then you have policies and standards and activities to do them, and then you have a measurement in the auditing of how well did we do, and then you have feedback to the top. How do we improve it? You have to be constantly improving, or you will fall behind because of change. So you have to have a closed loop of continuous improvement, or you do not achieve a high level of security posture. So here's the Six Sigma: define, measure, analyze, design, and verify. This loop you go around and around. Then there's the capability maturity model. This is a general way of improving a process. You can have it for developing or services or acquisitions. Any part of your business can have this loop of continuously deciding what you're trying to accomplish, try to accomplish it, measure to see how well you've done, and now improve the first step and go around the loop forever. So there are maturity levels. Initial is where you have some basic accomplishments, but you haven't got much security. Then there's managed, defined, quantitatively managed, and the one I talk about here, optimizing, where you have a closed loop so it will constantly improve your achievement of your goals. Here's the CRAMM technique. This is from the UK government. And so you identify and value assets, you identify threats, and then you put in countermeasures to limit those threats. This is the one I was thinking of before. This is XKCD quite recently. I thought it's pretty good. If you ask airplane designers, they tell you airplanes are going pretty well, elevators are going pretty well. If you ask software engineers about computerized voting, they say, no, 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 it's terrible. And they say, why is that? And the fundamental answer is security people are terrible at our jobs. You can hire security people and you will still get hacked. You don't hire airplane engineers and have the airplane crash. You get mad if that happens, but you hire the best security people in the world, you'll still get hacked. There's an explosion in hiring for our students because we're just throwing people at the problem. And it's getting worse and worse. That's why I remember Mandia, the guy that invented a lot of this stuff. Kevin Mandia was at RSA, and they had, in 2012, I was there, and he had LulzSec had just come out and hacked everybody and dumped all the police data and NPR and everything. And he said, I'll say it since nobody else is going to say it. LulzSec is the best advertisement for my product I've ever had. These guys are hacking everybody, and that's increasing my sales greatly. And we're still in that condition. Everybody is getting hacked, more and more records dumped every year. So the response is to train and hire more of us in the hopes that there is some point we'll have enough cops to stop the crooks. It's good for our hiring. I would like to think that sometime in the next 10 years, we'll actually develop some countermeasures that really work, like AI firewalls or something, and then it'll get back under control. But until that happens, it's an explosion of employment for all of us. So a top-down approach is what you normally want. This is a big thing, highly emphasized in CISSP. If you are a low-level worker and you have a security concern, you are wasting your time unless you get management buy-in. You can't fix any security problems unless someone is willing to allocate resources to fix them. So you need to first make a business case and get upper management on your side. And if you don't have upper management on your side, you are wasting your time trying to change. The top down is what works. Somebody high in management must be convinced that this matters, and then they can allocate resources and enforce policies and get things to go. If you try to do it from the bottom, you are being ineffective and wasting your time. All right, so let's take a look at more Cahoots. 1D. 1D is here. Good. Give it a few more seconds. See if we got any more coming. I guess that's it. Okay, which one came from ISO or iOS, International Organization for Standardization? That for some reason it's ISO, even though it's International Organization for Standardization. I think that's because the primary name is not in English. That's why it's international. Anyway, which one comes from ISACA? Yep, I know it's just alphabet soup to me, but you get used to it a little bit. Okay, that's COBIT. Which one is for the federal government? Okay, that's NIST. We're used to them for weights and measures. All right. And which one is primarily for healthcare? It's CSF. All right. So Jane seems to be the one that knows this stuff. And Miss M. And B is won every one so far. So I'll definitely have to make a scoreboard for you people to brag about your accomplishments. That's the closest I can get to making this a CTF, which I think it should be. So we're right next to the lunchroom, so I think I'll go until 5 minutes to lunchtime. We tried going earlier last time, and they didn't have any lunch out yet. So anyway, all right, so you got a life cycle. Your security program has a continuous life cycle. So you make plans, you implement them, you operate, maintain them, and then you have to monitor and evaluate to see if you're accomplishing your security goals. So here's your plan. You know, you make a plan, you implement it, you operate and maintain the plan, and then you monitor and evaluate to see if it's working or not, and then you go around and around this loop. Compliance is obeying a certain standard, like we're all doing here. You passed this test, you now have a CISSP, you have now complied with a certain standard. There's PCI DSS for credit cards, which is industry self-regulation, for better or worse, and apparently largely worse. And HIPAA for health insurance and portability, for medical data, but it only applies to certain entities. I complained about a lot of Android apps that were sending medical data over the internet, unencrypted or with weak encryption, and some of the companies responded to me and said, we are not covered by HIPAA. The only thing covered by HIPAA is large insurance providers. If I distribute an app to people to put on their phone to send their symptoms to their doctor, and I send it in plain text, that is not a HIPAA violation. And I said, gee, I'm not a lawyer, maybe it's not, but I still think it's a rotten thing to do, but they don't care because our lawyers told them it's okay. No, only certain providers having a lot of data. There are rules. Large.
So CRAMM has an online. My doctor is an online. Really, the only way to communicate with.
Yeah. Online portals, but I think like your browser. If your browser was unsafe, that would not be a HIPAA violation because it only affects you. If the repository with a whole lot of data leaks it, then I think that's a HIPAA violation. But even then, there are specific language of what kind of organizations are covered. So I, not being a lawyer, just said, well, you're handling medical data sloppily, you're violating HIPAA. And they said, that is not so. And I said, I suppose it's not. HIPAA is a law, and it only covers certain kinds of entities.
There's a website you can look at called the HIPAA Wall of Shame.
Yeah.
it leaks all that. Anything that's 500 or above that's leaked, just get closer to it, and you can check to see if any doctor that you look at is on that.
Yeah.
Beforehand.
Most doctors don't have anything.
Well, I did this.
It's like cedar cyanide, then it's good. But if your photo is a doctor, which is a mama pop thing,
Yeah.
then you're up in smoke.
I found 2,000 medical records just blowed in the breeze at Louisiana College. And I told them, and their response was to file an official letter blaming me for it and saying I was the breach by finding it. And that's one of the many times I needed my lawyer. And I found out, see, I told their HIPAA office. And because I did that, I do not get whistleblower protection. You only get whistleblower protection if you report them to the feds. And I thought I wouldn't do that. I would start by telling them locally, and that was a legal mistake. That's why I've learned to talk to my lawyer more. I got a good lawyer.
Go straight to the top.
Yeah.
You need to talk to your lawyer and find out what to do. In this case, I should have gone straight to the top.
So if you see a problem, you should,
No, I mean,
You see a problem, talk to a lawyer. Most security professionals, by the way, they will tell you, if you find a security problem, if you find a security problem somewhere, what security professionals will tell you is don't do anything. Unless they are paying you to audit them, say nothing and let them get hacked. That is the most professional thing to do, because the only thing you can accomplish by telling them is they will blame you and hurt you for it.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Working from public. If I were just to put up the wall of shame, am I going to cause myself any grief?
Oh, yes. If you're working, now what's the wall of
Show
shame?
the kids
You-
the
you-
wall of shame.
What's the wall of shame?
The HIPAA wall of shame.
The what?
The HIPAA wall of
Oh, if
shame.
you put up a post of somebody else's document, then you have perhaps coverage by free speech. But if it's about your institution,
No. Oh,
okay. If you put up a poster on the wall about bad things other people did, I think that's the same as any other class. I would think that's fine. I could put up a list of, say, historical bad things, and that would be part of a history class. I don't see a problem there. But I know when I taught at one of these conferences, I taught Android security, and one of my students found that college's app had a vulnerability, and they tried to ban me and throw me out of the conference. Most administrators do not want to hear about their problems, and they just think shooting the messenger is their first response always, and it's only later when they think there might be some other response. RSA, the #1 security conference in the world, 5 years ago, a company found a SQL injection vulnerability on the RSA conference website and told them, and their response was to ban them and cancel their booth so they couldn't go to the conference until the public outrage hit. Even security companies still have the same, every manager, the response to everything like this is to just shoot the messenger. Somehow it's a reflex. Nobody seems above it. Yeah.
Yeah, so if the student in your class actually found a vulnerability,
Yeah.
basically you're saying don't tell anyone.
Well, I do tell people this is called white hatting. It is considered unprofessional and sleazy, and all it does is get you in trouble. Now, the reason I do it is because I use real company apps in my classes. I warn them. Now, the general belief is, the general procedure is if you find a vulnerability, there's this thing called responsible disclosure. Now, what companies would like you to do is tell them and never tell anybody else ever, so they can never fix it at all. And they will make you wait 10 years. Companies would rather do absolutely nothing. So what Google does is, I give them 30 days. Other people give them a different amount of time. What Google does is they post it on a website. They have like a blog where it sits for 90 days and then becomes public. And they had a high vulnerability in Microsoft Windows, and Microsoft asked them to give them 92 days so they could hit patch Tuesday, and they refused. They will not move at all. So, but there are no laws where my lawyer tells me you are allowed to just go full disclosure and tell everybody about vulnerability you find because you have free speech. The only limitation on free speech is if you're saying something totally malicious and there's no good side. But if there is an aspect saying, I'm notifying customers, you should know about this, then you're just a whistleblower and you have the right to say that. However, in the industry, you will typically be considered a dangerous, irresponsible person if you don't give them some chance to fix it first. So typically something like 30 to 90 days or 6 months is typical. You tell them, and after that, you go full disclosure, and then you usually won't be regarded as a lunatic.
I guess my question is, because I'm so new to this,
Yeah.
I don't want to lose my job.
Yes.
I don't want to get my students in trouble. If I were just to use examples you used here,
All these are in the public records. I mean, and typically every security class does involve famous examples like this. So I mean, you're not going to get fired, I think, for citing these things that are out in the public news. The only thing that you get punished for is if you were the original source of it and it embarrassed your institution, I would think. Yeah, but well, you don't. That's what got me. You don't have to be very good. When I started doing security, within 2 years, I was in direct combat with criminals. I thought I would just be an academic miles behind the front lines, but the situation is so bad, the front lines is only a few yards ahead of where you are. If you start learning stuff, you will hit big problems fast, and you don't have to be a genius to find them. There's people selling webcams with default passwords. Cisco announced 8 hard-coded passwords this year in their products. Just, there's amazingly insecure stuff that you don't have to be very advanced to spot. You'll hit it once you start looking for it. Anyway, I'm going to stop the share. We ought to go to lunch. I assume it's at noon, ain't it? I'm going to go with that assumption. We'll come back after lunch, I guess at 1. Making people late for lunch is a capital